My mother-in-law said it at Thanksgiving, in front of everyone, between the sweet potato casserole and the pie. She set down her fork, looked across the table at her son with that particular expression she reserved for serious things. The same one she used when discussing property taxes or someone's poor life choices, and said, "Grady, I love you. But I think you settled." No one spoke. His father kept his eyes on his plate. His sister looked at the ceiling. Grady started to say something, but his mother kept going. "I'm not talking about her as a person," she said, like that made it better. "I just mean, what does she actually do? She works from home, she doesn't have a title. She doesn't have a career path that anyone can point to. You coach 2 sports, you teach, you built something real. She does consulting? For who? About what?" I was sitting right there, 7 seats away, but it might as well have been 7 miles. I said nothing. I reached for my wine, finished it slowly, and when Lorraine finally stopped talking, I smiled at her the way you smile at someone when you've already decided something. That same night, driving back to our house in South Austin, my husband said, "She didn't mean it the way it sounded." "I know," I said. "But..." He kept his eyes on the highway. "She's not entirely wrong, is she, about the direction thing? I've been thinking about it too. We're 32. I have a department. I have goals. You're still doing the same kind of work you were doing when we met." I looked out the passenger window at the lights blurring past on I-35. "Maybe you're right," I said. He didn't know that 2 days earlier, our company had closed an acquisition agreement worth $16.5 million. He didn't know because he'd never asked. 3 weeks later, at 2:47 in the morning, my phone rang. The name on the screen was Lorraine. Her voice, when I answered, was the voice of a woman who had just understood something that couldn't be undone. "I need you to tell me," she said, "that what I just read isn't real. But I'm getting ahead of myself." The night we got home from Thanksgiving, after he said what he said, I poured myself another glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table while he went to bed. I looked at the counters I'd picked out, the backsplash I'd chosen, the house I'd bought in 2019 for $485,000, in my name, from my savings, 8 months before we got engaged. He'd moved in after the wedding. I'd never changed the paperwork. Not out of strategy, just it never came up, he never asked. I called Daphne at 11:30. She answered on the second ring, because she always did. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. The dinner, Lorraine's speech, what he said in the car, the particular flatness I'd felt sitting at that table while his mother explained to the room that I was an afterthought in my own life. Daphne listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I think you've been running a company for 4 years, she said. "A company that just got acquired for $16.5 million. And your mother-in-law doesn't know what you do for a living. And your husband thinks you handle some vague consulting from the living room." "I do consult from the living room." "You run operations for a telehealth platform serving 40,000 patients across rural Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. That's not consulting, Imogen. That's a company. Our company." I already knew all of this. Hearing her say it out loud was something different. Daphne and I had met freshman year at UT Austin. She in computer science, me in healthcare administration. We'd stayed close through graduation, through our separate years in the industry, through late-night calls when we were both frustrated enough to want to do something about it. 4 years ago, we'd sat in the parking lot of a Whataburger on South Congress at midnight and she'd laid it out for me. Rural patients in Texas were waiting 6 to 8 weeks to see a specialist, a cardiologist, a neurologist, a dermatologist. Waiting lists that people in cities never had to think about. Meanwhile, there were physicians everywhere with availability they couldn't fill. "We build the bridge," she'd said. "Not another app, real infrastructure. We contract directly with rural hospital systems. We credential the physicians. We handle the liability, the billing, the compliance. We do the hard parts nobody else wants to touch." I'd said yes before she finished the sentence. We incorporated Bridgecare Health as an LLC in January of that year. Daphne handled the technical architecture. I handled everything else: the hospital contracts, the physician credentialing, the regulatory filings, the insurance negotiations, the board presentations that took 3 months of prep and 30 minutes to deliver. Year 1, we billed $340,000. Year 2, $1.8 million. Year 3, 4.1 million. This year we were tracking towards 6. When Tech Health Partners approached us about acquisition, I assumed it would fall through. Deals like that fell through. But this one didn't. The term sheet came. The due diligence happened. The attorneys reviewed everything. 2 days before Thanksgiving we signed $16.5 million for 55% of the company. My share, $8.3 million. Daphne's the same. I hadn't told my husband. I told myself it was timing, that I was waiting for the right moment. But Daphne had said something that night that I couldn't stop turning over. Every time the company hit a milestone, you waited. Every time you wired money to cover the bills, you waited. What exactly are you waiting for? I knew the answer. I just hadn't said it out loud. I was waiting to see if he loved me when there was nothing impressive about me to reflect back on him. The morning after Thanksgiving, I drove to Daphne's apartment in Bolden Creek. She made coffee, sat across from me and said, "So what are we doing?" I'm going to tell him. Everything? Everything. I'd spent the previous night going through 4 years of financial records, not to build a case, just to understand what I was actually looking at. The house, bought before we were married, in my name. He moved in after the wedding. I'd covered property taxes, insurance, the HVAC replacement 2 years ago, the new roof last spring after the hailstorm. His truck, a 2021 Ford F-150 he'd been talking about for 2 years. For his birthday, I paid $42,000, cash. He thought I'd been saving up from the consulting work. He never asked how long that had taken. His master's degree, the UT Austin Educational Leadership Program, $28,000 in tuition and fees. He'd asked a few months into our marriage if he should go back to school. I said yes. I wrote the checks. He graduated, got the department head position and called his mother first, then his father, then his college roommate. I was fourth. When Jefferson High closed in the spring of 2021, and he was suddenly without a position, I covered our mortgage for 18 months. $3,200 a month, transferred quietly from my business account to our joint account so he wouldn't have to face the math directly. He was embarrassed enough without me making a point of it. He never asked how I managed it. I'm not saying he was a bad person. I'm saying he was a person who had built his self-image around being the one who showed up. At school, at games, in his community, in our marriage. And who had quietly arranged the architecture of our life so that my contributions could be attributed to something vague and steady, like weather. I went home that Sunday afternoon and told him to sit down. He sat on the couch with his arms crossed, posture that said he expected an argument about his mother. 4 years ago, I said, Daphne and I started a company. He stared at me. We built a telehealth platform for rural hospital systems. We credential physicians and contract with rural clinics to provide specialist care to patients who otherwise wait months for an appointment. We're operating in 3 states. We have a clinical staff of over 60 credentialed providers and contracts with 14 hospital networks. He said, I don't understand. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I said, we closed an acquisition agreement with Tech Health Partners. I pulled up the signed paperwork on my laptop, turned the screen toward him. $16.5 million for 55% of the company. My shares is $8.3 million. He looked at the screen, then at me, then at the screen again. You're not serious. Would you like to see the wire transfer confirmation? It hit my account on Wednesday. The color left his face. Not all at once, gradually, the way light changes before a storm. Why didn't you tell me? The question came out thin, almost wounded. I thought about the honest answer, the one I'd been avoiding. Because every time you talked about your career, I said, your promotion, your department, your coaching record. I sat there and listened, for hours sometimes. And I thought that's what a good wife did. I thought making space for your success was love. I paused. I also thought you'd feel threatened, and I didn't want that. So I made myself small enough to let you feel like the most visible person in the room. He was quiet. Your mother's question at Thanksgiving, about what I actually do. In 5 years of marriage, you never asked me that question yourself. I looked at him steadily. Not once did you sit across from me and say, what are you building? What happens in those 8 hours while I'm at school? You told people I do some consulting. You told yourself whatever you needed to make the story make sense. I stood up. The house is in my name, your truck. I paid cash. Your master's program. I wrote every tuition check. When Jefferson High closed and you were out of work for 18 months, I covered this mortgage. Every month. From my business account. He didn't say anything. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, I said. I'm telling you because your mother sat at a dinner table and told everyone I had nothing to show for myself. And you nodded. I picked up my keys. Take some time, go stay with your parents. But when you're ready to have an actual conversation, not a defense, not a performance, I'll be here. He went to his parents' house that night. Took a bag and left without looking back at me. Over the next 10 days he sent 31 messages. The first few were defensive. I never agreed with what my mom said. You're taking this out of context, then confused. Why would you hide this from me? What does that say about us? By day 5, something quieter. My friend asked me today if I'd ever actually asked about your work. I couldn't answer him. By day 9 short. I miss you. I don't know how to fix this. Please, can we just talk? I responded to 0 of them. In my early consulting days, before Bridge Care, I'd worked with hospital systems on patient safety crises. I'd learned then that silence was often more clarifying than anything you could say. It made people fill the vacuum with themselves, with their own fears and projections. Made them finally look at the things they'd been able to ignore, as long as someone else was managing the noise. I let him fill the noise. Meanwhile, Daphne and I were coordinating with Priscilla Okonkwo, a journalist at the Austin American-Statesman, who covered the health tech sector. She'd found us through a source at Tech Health Partners and wanted to do a feature, 2 women. A telehealth company built in 4 years, an 8-figure acquisition, and almost no one in the industry had heard our names. That's the story, she said, the invisible founders. We talked for 2 hours. The piece was scheduled to run the Sunday before Christmas. His family did Christmas at his parents' house in Cedar Park every year. 2 weeks before the holiday, Lorraine called to confirm I was coming. I was mildly surprised she called me directly. Of course, I said. Actually, I'd love to host this year. Take it off your plate. A pause. Host you want to? Not at our house. There's a restaurant I've been wanting to take everyone to. It would be something special. My treat. She accepted. I could hear the hesitation in it, but she accepted. I called Arlo's in downtown Austin and reserved the private dining room for 12. A screen and projector I could connect my laptop to. The chef's tasting menu, wine pairings for every course. I'd been there once for a client dinner and understood immediately that it was the kind of restaurant where the quiet itself cost money. The night of the dinner, I arrived 30 minutes early. Tall ceilings, white linen, candles set low in clean holders. I tested my slides, built the same way I built every board presentation, with the precision of someone who expected questions on every number. His parents arrived first, Lorraine in a Christmas red blazer, his father Harlan in a sport coat with a department store crease still in the sleeve. They looked around the room with the cautious appreciation of people who don't often eat at places like this. Lorraine hugged me at the door, held on a half-second longer than usual. His sister Bea came with her husband. 2 family friends followed, a couple who'd known the family since the kids were in middle school. Then my husband. He came in wearing the charcoal dress shirt I'd bought him from a shop on South Congress, the one I'd taken him to for our 3rd anniversary. He scanned the room, found me, and something moved across his face that I couldn't quite name. Not hope, more like a man who has been replaying a conversation for 2 weeks and still doesn't know how it ends. Imogen, he said. Sit down, I said gently. We're about to start. When everyone had wine, I stood at the head of the table. Thank you all for coming, I said. I thought this Christmas should be something special, and I wanted the people in this room to be the ones I shared it with. Lorraine was watching me with an expression I'd never seen on her face, worriness. The look of someone who has belatedly noticed the ground has shifted. 3 weeks ago at Thanksgiving, I said, you asked what I actually do. It was a reasonable question. I should have answered it years ago. I connected my laptop to the screen. Let me answer it now. The first slide, the BridgeCare Health logo and founding date. 4 years ago, my business partner and I started a telehealth company in Austin. We connect rural patients with specialist physicians, patients who are waiting 6 to 8 months for a cardiology consult, children in Marfa and Presidio, who'd never seen a pediatric neurologist. I advanced through the slides. Revenue charts, client contracts, 40,000 patients served, 62 credentialed physicians, 14 hospital networks across 3 states. Year 1, $340,000. Year 2, $1.8 million. Year 3, $4.1 million. This year, $6.2 million. The room was completely silent. 2 days before Thanksgiving, we finalized an acquisition agreement. Next slide. Official letterhead. The number at the bottom, $16.5 million. My share, $8.3 million. Harlan made a sound somewhere between a cough and the start of a word. I let it sit, then I moved to the next section. I also want to share something else. Because what I built is only part of the story. Bank statements, mortgage records, tuition receipts, one by one. This is our mortgage, I said. It's in my name. Bought in 2019 with my savings, before we were married. My husband moved in after the wedding. I advanced. This is 18 months of mortgage payments I made from my business account when Jefferson High closed. $3,200 a month, transferred quietly so he wouldn't have to feel the weight of it. Next slide. This is the tuition receipt for his master's program, $28,000. Next. This is the purchase record for his truck, $42,000, cash for his birthday 2 years ago. My husband's hands were flat on the table. I want to be clear about something, I said. I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I looked at Lorraine directly for the first time all evening. But 3 weeks ago, you sat at a dinner table and told your family that your son had settled by marrying me. That a good wife would have a title, a career path, something visible to point to. Something impressive enough to stand beside him. She opened her mouth. And I looked at my husband, didn't correct you. Not at the table, not in the car, not until he was alone with me, when he said he'd been thinking the same thing. The room held its breath. I paid for this dinner, I said quietly. Every course, every wine pairing, every candle on this table. The woman you thought had nothing to show for herself is hosting your Christmas at one of the finest restaurants in Austin. I picked up my glass. Consider it a gift. I looked at my husband one last time. I loved you, I said. I still do, the way you love something that was genuinely real. But I spent 5 years disappearing so you could feel like the most visible person in any room. I'm not doing that anymore. I drank, set the glass down, and walked out of Arlo's into the December night. I drove home, parked in the garage, sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, because sometimes your body needs to be low to the ground before it can find its footing again. I cried for about 20 minutes. Not for him exactly. For the version of myself who had made herself so small for so long that she'd stopped noticing the shrinking. Then I washed my face, made tea, and sat in the living room in the dark. At 2:47 in the morning, my phone rang. Lorraine. I let it ring 4 times, then I answered. Her voice was nothing like the voice from Thanksgiving. That voice had been positioned, prepared, certain of itself. This was something else entirely. The article, she said. Priscilla Okonkwo. It went up an hour ago. Grady showed me. There are photos, there's an interview, it says. She stopped, tried to pull herself together. It says you built this company while. She stopped again. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. I said terrible things. At Thanksgiving, to your face, I looked right at you and told my son he'd settled. Her voice broke. And you were running a company that was about to make $8 million. Yes. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you tell me? I thought about it honestly. Because you'd already decided who I was, I said, and I was tired of asking people to look more carefully. Silence. Long enough that I could hear traffic somewhere in the background, the thin sound of an Austin highway at 3 a.m. Is there anything I can do? She asked. No, I said, but I appreciate you calling. Imogen. Lorraine. My voice was even. The same tone I used to close a call that had reached its natural end. It's almost 3 in the morning. Get some sleep. We can talk when there's something real left to say. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my kitchen. By morning, the Statesman article had been shared almost 2,000 times. By noon, the Austin Business Journal had picked it up. By the following Wednesday, I had 6 national interview requests, 2 podcast invitations, and an email from Forbes asking if Daphne and I would be available for their Women in Business feature. I said yes to all of it. 6 weeks later, I stood on a stage at a conference center in downtown Austin for the Women in Health Innovation Summit. 240 people in the audience, most of them younger than me, most of them building things they hadn't told anyone about yet. I talked for 35 minutes about invisibility, about the cost of making yourself small in the places where you should be most fully yourself, about what happens when you stay quiet so long that the people closest to you genuinely lose the ability to see you, and about the moment you finally decide to stop, not to hurt anyone, not to prove anything, but because you understand at last that your visibility is not a negotiable thing. Afterward, a woman found me near the side exit. She couldn't have been older than 27. She had the look of someone who had been doing significant work in private for long enough that she'd stopped believing it counted. My partner keeps telling me my company isn't a real company, she said, that it's a hobby, that I need to focus on building a real career and stop chasing something that isn't going anywhere. She paused. He says I'm wasting our time. How much did you bring in last year? I asked. She looked at the floor. 160,000. But it fluctuates, it's not. What would make it a real company to him? She thought about it for a long moment. I don't think anything would. I think he needs me to be smaller than him. She looked up. And I don't know how much longer I can do that. I looked at her for a moment. Then you already know what you need to do. She nodded. Slowly, then with the particular certainty of someone who has just stopped pretending they don't know the answer. I walked out of the conference center into the January morning and stood on the sidewalk while Austin moved around me. The air was clean and cool, carrying the smell of coffee from somewhere close by, and the city was doing what cities do. Rolling forward, indifferent, full of people in the middle of their own reckonings. I thought about bridge care, about the clinic in Presidio that now had a cardiologist available on Tuesday afternoons and a neurologist on Thursdays, because of what Daphne and I had built from 2 laptops and one very late conversation in a parking lot. Remarkable, it turned out, had never needed an audience to be real. It had only ever needed, eventually, to stop hiding.